This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 9th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit company that was incorporated in Ohio in August of 2012 and is currently awaiting approval for tax-exempt status from the IRS. Right and Left is a grassroots effort to promote civil discourse in politics. Our ultimate aim is to reduce the level of extreme partisanship that is crippling government at all levels. We think a good beginning is to influence the way voters relate to each other. 24-hour cable news, extremely biased talk radio, and social media have all contributed to a level of intolerance that Right and Left Incorporated is committed to combating on several fronts. Organizationally, we are patterned after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. As such, we are establishing and fine-tuning a chapter in Wadsworth, Ohio, to use as a template for replication in chapters in other communities. Each chapter will have an active presence in its community with a speakers bureau, a local access TV program, visibility at local events, an aggressive advertising campaign, and a fundraising effort. Nationally, we will have an interactive website featuring strong messages promoting civil discourse, an endorsable belief statement, a regular newsletter, and a capacity for the exchange and dissemination of ideas. We plan a multimedia advertising effort that will use the lion's share of our budget. Our discussion forum is aimed at demonstrating that reasonable people with different political views can have reasonable discussions about contentious topics. Today, our panel will discuss restoring the military draft. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Jerry Ritzman, Vice President and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Larry Lann, retired Vice President of Finance and Administration at Kovack Community College and former Finance Director for the City of Akron. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher at Wadsworth High School and member of the Wadsworth City Council. Today's discussion begins with Jerry Ritzman on my left. Jerry, military conscription has been part of American life in one form or another since the Revolution until 1972. Some think it should be reinstated. What do you think, Jerry?
Well, John, my opinion is that it should be reinstated. And the reason that I think this way is that I think that our country's been involved in some military entanglements over the last 10 to 15 years, and there's a lot of feeling that we should not be involved in those entanglements or in those military actions. And I think that if the participation in the military was more widespread, you would hear an outcry from the citizenry that would demand that we get out of those military actions. Because I wonder how many times in a week, let alone in a day, a huge majority of our population even thinks about or is aware of our involvement in the military actions in Afghanistan. And I don't even know if we're in Iraq anymore and what we're going to be doing in the other Mideast countries. I think that if there was a wider involvement from all sections of the population, that the individuals would hold those who can involve us in those military actions more accountable. That's why, the main reason that I'm in favor of it.
That's very interesting, Jared. Interesting to hear you say that. I've never been personally involved in the military. Let me tell you a little short story. When I turned 18 and went to register for the draft, I was already accepted to college. And since I was from a small town in Pennsylvania, I had no trouble getting a student deferment, which I kept until such time as I obtained my doctorate. And at that time, I had 2 children and married, and had the Russians or the Chinese communists or the Vietnamese invaded the post office, I could have stayed home and filled sandbags, so no particular problem. However, during the Vietnam situation, I found myself becoming increasingly polarized against the war, against military involvement from our country in that issue. And by 1970, when the events at Kent State happened, I was going through some interesting things in my own time. I just had a new baby. So I thought, this has turned me against this. I looked around, I became a member of a religious group, which is one of the traditional peace churches. And I don't consider myself a pacifist exactly. I think that some military involvement is probably necessary in this modern world. I don't think that the world will ever go to nonviolence, although we've never tried it. So who knows what'll happen. But for the reason for my moral issue, I personally, for my own personal involvement, I'm pacifistic. I'm not going to become involved in it. So if the draft is reinstated, and I like, Sherry, I like your reason for this, I can agree with that. I want to see a conscientious objection clause included there, as we have had during World War II and World War I. Alternative service in some sort, although morally that's still participating in some ways. But I want to see that. I would not want to approve it otherwise. I like the idea of, yes, get the citizenry involved. This happened during Vietnam. I think it got us out of Vietnam. It got LBJ out of Vietnam by citizen involvement.
Whether for the right or wrong reasons.
Whether for the right or wrong reasons, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, we have to go into places like Iraq to take care of the weapons of mass destruction. Oh, wait, they weren't there, were they? So.
They're in Syria now. Larry, your involvement in the military extended beyond sandbags at the post office.
Right. No, and I think, you know, historically, most people have been against the draft until such a time as they needed troops. I mean, that's what the history has told us. I graduated from high school in 1965, so I was right at the heart of the Vietnam era. I started into college, did okay, nothing particularly great, and but I decided, as many people did then, you know, because they say that the draft triggers a lot of other people volunteering into other things. I went into the Marine Reserves, and it was primarily because you couldn't get into the National Guard at that time because everybody wanted into it.
It was crowded.
Yeah, and so that was my way. I mean, I may have gotten drafted after, you know, I left college and took another means that a lot of people took, you know, entering the Air Force, things like that, to try to get away from the ground troops. Well, I went into the Marines as a reserve and ended up staying in for 3 years, enrolled in avionics. At that time, I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I didn't realize you had to take calculus to be able to do that. You know, so I took that means out of it. For me, it was a good experience being in the military, and I would recommend it to most people. But in Vietnam, there were so many ways to get deferred. I mean, the education, the college education aspect of things, you know, was probably the primary one. And most of my friends, you know, I told you earlier that I had 8 high school buddies that we stayed in contact with. One was in the National Guard. The rest were deferred from college, except for one who was actually got drafted and was in Vietnam, in the boonies. You know, I was in Vietnam, but on a base where I was fixing, you know, electronics in aircraft, etc. So I didn't see a lot of the terror that comes from that.
Patty, you're thinking hard, I can tell.
Yes. You know, it's interesting. My father, whom I had the greatest respect for, served the entire war in World War II. And when the war first broke out, he actually had a deferment because he was a machinist. And at the beginning of the war, there were deferments from the draft for various skilled positions. He chose to go ahead and join anyway, much to the chagrin of my grandmother. And till the day he died, he said he strongly felt there should be a draft because he felt it was a character building experience and it should be a shared sacrifice of all. My concerns at this point, however, is it's never really a totally shared sacrifice unless you require all males and all females at a certain age to perform some sort of military service or some sort of alternative service. I think they do that in Israel, if I'm not mistaken, that all young men and women of that age are required to do it. Even with the draft reinstated, you only need a certain number of soldiers. And so therefore there are going to be those that serve and those that don't. And my question would be right now, do we need an increase in our military numbers? Or actually should they be decreased at this particular point as we draw out of Iraq, as we hopefully draw out of Afghanistan soon? Will those numbers go up? Or should they go up? Another concern is, with the draft, you are pulling people from perhaps skilled positions that they're performing in the public sector here in the United States and forcing them to go to the military. And, of course, everyone is replaceable, but sometimes that there is difficulty. I know during World War II, they found, because all the males ended up being drafted, that there was a shortage of people to produce materials for the war effort. It wasn't being done by the military. They needed more people working here than they did actually producing, than actually going out and fighting the war. So I guess I would wonder first if there is a necessity for it. Do we need more members in the service?
Isn't it interesting that in World War II, that very thing really gave rise to the women's movement?
Exactly, because it was women that went.
Yes.
However, when the soldiers came back, the women went back to the house.
Yeah, but they didn't stay there.
But that's true, we didn't.
And that's good.
And that is good. So, and will it affect all males and females between a certain age? What type of conscientious objector or alternative service would you provide? So those are my questions.
You said in World War II, your father supported the draft. They said, at least the facts I had, like in 1940, about 70% of the people felt that there should be compulsory military training. That's when the need is there, people are supported. In World War I, they had a hard time recruiting. They put the draft in place because they couldn't recruit people voluntarily. So there's a lot of that. That changes.
Well, you go back to the Civil War, and it was corrupt because you could
your way
buy out of a
have somebody
position,
go for you.
and exactly have someone go for you, which is interesting. So,
When my wife was doing research on her family background, which goes back to the Revolution, there were documents indicating that her great-great-grandfather, whatever, had a choice of paying money or sending a son. You had to do one or the other, but you could buy your way out if you buy your son's way out if you had the money to do that. But one of the things that I'm interested in exploring is that this feeling that Jerry has highlighted, that having a draft, to some people's way of thinking, tends to expand the feeling of responsibility on the part of the entire population, and that there's more input as to our government's policies relative to war, and that they may be more reluctant if there's going to be a draft. There's something about an all-volunteer army that seems to take it away from the person on the street, because they have a choice.
Yeah, they want to be there. The people that volunteer, they want to be there. That's the argument that they're better at being in the military. But your idea that, hey, I wanted to be in the military, why should I want it to end?
The thing that occurred to me yesterday, I hadn't really given this a whole lot of thought until when Jerry decided it would be a great topic. And I started thinking about my own experience. I went into the Army in 1957, But it was like an expanded Boy Scout experience. It was the 6-month Reserve Forces Act thing. You went on active duty for 6 months, and then went to meetings for the rest of your teenage years.
And they didn't send reserves to battle at that stage.
Well,
Even in Vietnam.
National Guard was the way out. Yeah.
But even though I enlisted, it was either that or be drafted. So there was no choice, really. People my age were going to put in military time or get deferred like Ron did. But the feeling now is that people who are volunteering for the Army take it more seriously. They're more interested in learning the skills than the draftees did. That they've got pride in their MOS. And I can remember the saying when I was in the Army was, the only thing I want out of the Army is out of the Army. And that you had your couple of years to put in, and you were just going to go ahead and do it. So I think that there probably is a more of a feeling of dedication to the job if you're a volunteer.
Excuse me, Ryan, but the military people who are still in favor of an all-volunteer Army cite those facts, that it's of a higher skill and dedication level. They get more re-enlistments out of the volunteer Army than they ever did out of the draft Army when it was draft, or any of the military services. And so that it's a more effective, more dedicated force when it's all volunteer. And I don't have an argument with that. I feel, though, however, if we had a draft, that there could be kind of a sub-volunteer force that wants to get involved in combat and so forth, as they are now. Some of the other functions that are being carried out by contractors could be carried out by people that are actually drafted. And I think that it would give some sense of duty or of providing public service to those people that were drafted. They wouldn't have to be involved in those areas. And again, Ron, I want to agree with you on the alternative services. I had relatives in my wife's family who were very strong conscientious objectors in the 40s, and throughout the war served alternative service in military hospitals, in public projects, and that type of thing. And so it wasn't a totally negative experience. I even had a cousin who was a CO, but he was in uniform, but never carried a weapon, and was a driver in Japan. So there are possibilities, but I think that it would raise the awareness of what our military involvements are, and if people who had family members in the service that were opposed to it would be more likely to voice their opinion than those who didn't.
Well, it's exactly our position we took during Vietnam. Here we have 3 boys, and thinking in the future, do we really want those kids over there carrying guns and shooting people? No, we don't.
That's the Pat Paulson thing, I'm opposed to war. I mean, most of us are. In support of the draft, some people have said that the military people that are getting deployed over and over and over again are really getting stressed, and I think you're seeing some of that. That's one of the the arguments, that they need more people in there. But it's I think it was President Nixon. He ended the draft to try to stop the protesters. He didn't care about ending the draft. He thought if you end the draft, the wealthier people and students who were protesting would stop protesting because they'd no longer be threatened. It's the personal issue.
It didn't work.
He misread that. He misread that.
He did.
It wasn't against the draft, it was against the war.
Yeah, no, I know.
He misread it. Misread a few things.
Ron, or Jerry, I'm sorry, Jerry, would you recommend that everyone have to do a service, or would you do like a draw by the birth date number?
No, I think that the selection method and what order that you were called into service, that I don't really have an opinion on that. But I think there should be some type of universal service, whether it's in the military, whether it's in public service projects, whether it be...
For everyone?
Yes, for everyone.
Okay.
I really do.
Including women?
Absolutely, yeah. And with a minimal number of deferments, but to have some type of public service.
If we did have a draft, Jerry, would you suggest that women be treated exactly the same as men?
I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that would be up to the women.
I think that's probably, they probably should, you know, the issue of what kind of assignments and the combat type of issue, I would probably leave that up to the individual woman. It's sort of the conscientious objector type of thing in the military.
Didn't they just
Yeah,
rule
how
that
much
women-
opportunity do you have to object when you're in the military?
Didn't they just rule, though, that women can serve in combat
Yes.
situations?
That was sort of a mandate from Leon Panetta, Secretary
Yes.
of Defense, and I don't know what kind of weight that carries under the law. If somebody were to decide to sue, take it to the Supreme Court, I'm not sure how that would...
Part of his reasoning was that already in Iraq and Afghanistan there are women in those positions, just by default.
Yeah.
You know, it was interesting when I was looking up what countries in the world still have a draft, and they tend to be, it's the North Korea, it's Iran. Now there are democratic nations that still have a draft and a required service like Israel, but the majority of them were the countries that we are in disagreement with now, and those that we would term as our allies have gotten rid of the draft as the United States. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, somebody had just, he proposed, and this isn't somebody that I would say, oh, I'm glad this guy proposed it. Charles Rangel proposed it like in 10 years ago or something like that. I just saw somewhere where he's going to be proposing it or has proposed it again, and he would require, women in that.
Rangel is going to propose the draft be reinstated?
Correct.
Is that right?
He did in like 2004, et cetera. And I had a hard time determining whether the selective service registration is still in effect. I think it is, but I don't think anybody enforces it. It's a felony if you don't
You still
register.
I believe.
I think one of the things that we need to point out before our time is up is that during the Vietnam War, the issue had a lot to do with the people actually serving in the military were disproportionately poor and black and Hispanic, and that was one of the reasons given for opposing the draft at the time. And now when the subject comes up, there's a misunderstanding that we continue to have a disproportionate number of poor and black and Hispanics serving in the military, which is certainly not true. The military is now underrepresented by poor and minorities and overrepresented by upper income people. That was a fascinating bit of information
you pointed that out earlier.
Just came to, but not on the air, Ron.
No, I understand that.
But I think it's kind of interesting to take that into consideration. But,
What was interesting to me when I did the small amount of research that I did on this topic, rather than just opinionating, is that I would have thought that the resumption of the draft would be favored more by a conservative, somebody with a conservative viewpoint, and it's the exact opposite of that. Everything that I've read supporting the draft has come from, or most of the stuff has come from those sources that you would usually consider more on the liberal slant.
Ron
Vice
Paul
versa.
likens it to slavery. Of course, he is a libertarian, which they are anti-war, but he is truly a conservative. So.
Right.
Well, most politicians today, I think, are, from what I could see, are opposed to the draft. Obama, most politicians that I looked up, they were opposed to the draft, and
I can't find any significant support for it any place. One question for Ron before we get 21 seconds. If you can wave a magic wand, being a Mennonite, being a pacifist, would there be any military at all?
No.
Oh, well.
So to say we've never tried it.
There's conscription today. I mean, if you think about it, jury duty is a conscription. High school, or school. We require the kids to go to school.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for another thoughtful discussion. I want to thank our viewers for joining us. And to learn more about Right and Left, visit our temporary website, rightandleft.org. Or to become a volunteer or contribute to Right and Left Incorporated, or to comment on today's program, please contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And I would like to leave you all with this thought. To better understand the world, resist the urge to believe only what you want the truth to be.
Thank you.